Hi, this is Andre. The Loupé is a new hardware looper being released in May 2021 by Glou-Glou Effects that implements a lot of the more sophisticated looping functions that I've been talking about on this channel for several years now. They very kindly sent me a unit to work with, and I have honestly and sincerely been thrilled by dealing with it. A lot of the functions that I've been covering and that are contained in the Loupé are things that have not been seen in any newly released hardware for many, many years. So for me to be able to access these things in a newly released device that is currently supported is really, really exciting. It's also important to mention that the Loupé is not just reworking older concepts. There's a lot that it brings to the table that is completely new, that I have not seen or heard of existing in any other piece of hardware or software before. I will be talking about those down the road, partially because they're so new to me that I'm still wrapping my head around some of those concepts, and I need to do my own homework before I try and act like I know what I'm talking about. This particular video is just going to scratch the surface of Loupé. There's a lot of aspects to it, many of which I'm not even going to try and cover in a preliminary video. This is going to walk through some of the core functionality of the Loupé and look at how the different functions interact with each other. One important thing to mention as well is that any function in Loupé can be assigned to any one of the 5 foot switches or the 4 button controls. You can save different combinations of functions in presets, and presets are called games in Loupé terminology. So any function can be mapped to any button. I am using the labeled functions on the hardware, the record, overdub, replace, etc. labels, as a starting point. A lot of the factory games that Loupé ships with use those as starting points. And for this video, I've configured my own game using those 5 core functions in settings that seem to be the most widely applicable. So this is just going to get us started with Loupé, look at a lot of its main functions, look at how those functions interact, and literally just scratch the surface of some of what it can do. Okay, let's record an initial loop. We're going to start with record and end with overdub so that we can go straight from setting the initial loop length to adding new stuff on top. So there's our initial loop. Now we're going to multiply this out to several times the original length using the multiply function. And if you look at the upper display right under the word Loupé, you can see it's counting down different multiples of the original loop. Now those multiples are called cycles, and cycles can be 2 things. They can be multiples of the original loop, which is what we did, but they can also be new information. There we go. So these are new bits of information we added in between the old cycles. So it's not copying old material, but it is the same length as the previous multiples. And you can go down to a smaller number of cycles, use multiply again. And then build off of that. And then we can go all the way back using undo. And there's the initial loop before we even added overdub. Let's go ahead and overdub something back on. And let's multiply this out slightly differently. Now another way of adding new content to a loop aside from overdub is using replace. The difference here is that overdub builds new layers on top of old layers, and replace completely overwrites the old material with whatever you're playing. And you can hear the old stuff in the loop is completely covered up. Let's remultiply to a shorter loop, make it a little easier to hear, and I'm going to do some more replace stuff. Overdub new stuff. And I have replace set up so that it's a sustain function. That means that it's only active for as long as you press it down. So if you press it very quickly, then you can drop very short little snippets into the loop. And if you're not playing anything, you just drop silence into it. And of course, all this can be undone. Let's multiply this out a little bit. Now let's talk about decay. Decay is known by different names depending on the looper. Some refer to it as feedback, some call it loop aging, but the idea is that it causes the old layers to fade out. As soon as I bring it down, you can see that it switches from sample to tails, and you can hear that it's starting to get quieter. But this is not just an auto fade out function, and here's why. I'm going to bring decay down a little more so that it fades out quicker. But if I overdub new stuff on top, you can hear that's at full volume. And if we bring decay back up to 100%, now we're going to freeze the loop at this new stage of development, and we can keep overdubbing or replacing or multiplying. So decay lets you completely evolve the content of a loop. And instead of fading out the entire loop, you can also add a fade just into the middle of it. So decay, feedback, aging, however you call it, is still a really, really powerful tool for developing a loop. Speaking of powerful tools, let's look at Scroll. Scroll lets you go forwards and backwards in different stages of the loop's development like this. Each of these little blocks here is a window of previous stages of the loop's development. And what I'm going to do now is resample the loop using multiply, and I'm going to turn the scroll knob as I do that. So we're going to get different windows of loop development recorded into a new loop. So now we've got a new loop, and you can hear that scrolling behavior. And again, we can remultiply down and do all the old stuff we were doing. And let's use decay, but we're not going to overdub this time. We're going to let the loop fade out, and if we don't add anything new, then it will fade out to silence. And you can hear this new stuff I'm adding isn't being added because we're not using overdub or replace or multiply or anything else that would add new material. And then you can hear it's just in the final stages of fading out there. But let's say we want to undo that too. And now because we left decay at slightly less than 100, we're fading out again. And because we closed Overdub, nothing's being added in.